how can Israel be God's firstborn son in Exodus 4:22, and the Lord also be a husband unto Israel in Jeremiah 31, verse 32? Let me say that question again. In Exodus 4:22, it says that Israel is God's firstborn son. But in Jeremiah chapter 31, God says he's a husband unto Israel. Well, isn't that inconsistent? What is God's relationship with Israel? Are they a firstborn son, or are they a spouse? How does that work? I don't know. So look with me at Exodus chapter 4. Exodus 4. Let's look at the verses so you can see the issue, and then we'll give you what we think is the scriptural answer. Exodus chapter 4, verse 22. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. Compare that with Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31. Behold, the days come, I'm in verse 31. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. Exodus 4, Israel is God's firstborn son. Jeremiah 31:32, God is a husband to Israel. That seems inconsistent. So what do we do? When there are two verses in the Bible that seem to contradict, the question is never which verse is right. Both verses are right. They have to be, because otherwise the Bible would contain errors. So the question is, how do we understand how both verses are right? To do that, look with me at Hosea 12. Hosea chapter 12. Hosea chapter 12, verse 10. I have also spoken by the prophets, and I have multiplied visions. Notice this next part. And used similitudes by the ministry of the prophets. In other words, God used similitudes. He used metaphors. He used comparisons. He used types. He used figures. In other words, he used similitudes to communicate truth. And it says there, similitudes plural, by the ministry of the prophets. So let me give you an example of that. Get Matthew 13. Now, while you turn to Matthew 13, I'm going to ask you a question. That question is this. What is the kingdom of heaven like? Can you recall? There's a metaphor, there's a similitude that God uses to describe the kingdom of heaven. It's in Matthew 13. Let's look at it. Matthew 13:24. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which soweth good seed in his field. Okay, so we know what the kingdom of heaven is like. It's like a man that soweth good seed. But let's keep reading. Verse 31. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed. Well, wait a minute. The earlier verse said it was like to a man sowing good seed. Now it says it's like a mustard seed. That's sort of different. I mean, maybe it's close, but it's sort of different. Well, let's keep reading. Verse 33. Another parable spake he unto them, The kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven. Well, wait a minute. That's not like a seed. That's not like a man sowing a field. Verse 44. Again, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto treasure hid in a field. Now, wait a minute. Knock it off. What are you doing, God? And I'm pounding the table, and I'm making the microphone make too much noise and so on, but I'm getting excited, so I apologize. What's going on here? There are clearly different similitudes being used. Let's keep reading. Verse 45, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchantman seeking goodly pearls. Verse 47, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net. Get Matthew chapter 18, Matthew 18:23. Matthew 18 and verse 23. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king which would take account of his servants. Matthew 20. Matthew 20 and verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. Matthew 22, verse 2. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king, which made a marriage for his son. Matthew 25. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins. Matthew 25:14. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country. Now, if you notice what just happened, the kingdom of heaven is likened to at least 11 different things, 11 different similitudes. Many of those are in the exact same chapter. You know what that tells you? It's okay for the kingdom of heaven to be likened to different things. It's okay for there to be different similitudes, because similitudes are not the exact description of the thing. They're a likening, they're a comparison. They are something that is similar but not identical. Let me give you another example. Get with me Ephesians 6 and 1 Thessalonians 5. So Ephesians 6 and 1 Thessalonians 5. And please get both of these, because I want you to see this. I want you to see this at the same time. So get Ephesians 6 and 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Ephesians 6 and 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Ephesians 6:16. Above all, taking the shield of faith. Okay, makes sense. There's a shield of faith that the believer needs. But notice 1 Thessalonians 5:18. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love. Well, now I've got a question. Which is it? Is faith a shield or is it a breastplate? Because Ephesians 6:16 said it was the shield of faith. But 1 Thessalonians 5:8 says it's the breastplate of faith. Those are different. Get with me, Ephesians 6. You've still got Ephesians 6, but now we're going to look at verse 14. Ephesians 6, verse 14. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness. So in Ephesians 6, there's a breastplate of righteousness. Compare that with 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 8. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love. Well, now we have a problem, don't we? Ephesians says it's the breastplate of righteousness. 1 Thessalonians 5 says it's the breastplate of faith and love. You know how armor works. Do you wear multiple breastplates? You normally don't. You have just one. Well, which is it? Which one's right? Of course, you know the answer is both have to be right. But let's see it again. Keep Ephesians 6 and get 2 Corinthians 6. Ephesians 6 and 2 Corinthians 6. Ephesians 6, it talks about the breastplate of righteousness. But then notice 2 Corinthians 6, verse 7. By the word of truth, by the power of God, by the armor of righteousness, notice what it says, on the right hand and on the left. Well, is righteousness a breastplate that you wear on your chest, or is it gauntlets that you wear on your hands? Now, I'm not suggesting to you the Bible has errors. Of course it doesn't have errors. That's not true. God is a God of truth. His word does not contain errors. But the fact of the matter is those verses don't say the same thing. And when they describe the armor of God, at one point it says the breastplate is righteousness. At another time it says it's the breastplate of faith. How can all of those things be true? And what I would just share with you is this. Is God limited that he's only allowed to use one similitude? Is there a quota? Is there some sort of shortage in heaven and God has to pick one similitude for something and he can't use anything else? In other words, he can pick one metaphor for spiritual truth, for example, the armor of God or righteousness or what have you, and he's only allowed to pick one. He can't pick anything else. Well, that's not the way that it works. God has the authority to use multiple similitudes, and that is what he has done. That's what he did with the kingdom of heaven, where there's a whole bunch of different similitudes to describe it. That's what he did with the armor of God, and that's what he did with his relationship with Israel in the Old Testament. Now, just to state the obvious, these similitudes are a description, they're a picture of what the spiritual truth is like. They're not identical to it. The reason the similitude is used is not because it is a perfect physical description of something spiritual. It's used because it's an approximation that we can grasp, because we understand how armor works, and we understand what a man seeking goodly pearls is like, and we understand what, the different metaphors are given for the kingdom of heaven. They're physical pictures that are helpful for us to grasp deeper spiritual realities. That's why God has different similitudes. So in the Old Testament, when Israel is described as a firstborn son, or Israel is described where God is a husband unto them, neither is literally physically true, but both are correct spiritual similitudes describing what the relationship is like.